Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and we are on the air 2 weeks in a row again, which is always a nice feeling. Joining me once again is Youri Smouter, the host of the 1+1 program here on YouTube. How's it going, Youri?
Going good, Chris. I'm looking forward to the topics we're going to be exploring. It's always an honor to be invited on, and thanks for the invitation.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. I'm always glad to have somebody to talk to. I need to do some more solo shows instead of just not doing shows on the weekend when I haven't been able to book a guest, but I don't always have the energy. It's easier when there's someone to talk to.
Actually, it's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because I was just thinking the other day. I was lucky enough to catch the live stream of Black Liberation Media's Saturdays with Renee, who who's a mutual comrade of ours.
Oh,
She's been on
yes.
your program many times, and I was watching her live stream with Jared Ball, and I was just thinking to myself, Jared is one of the very few people, one of the very few leftists who, if it's just him talking to the audience, he's actually really, really good at it. Because there are others who are great writers, but they need a co-host, and if it's just them, like, talking into the either worlds, I don't know. I just turn off from it, and then of course with the rise of these very, you know, I don't quite like the whole like left wing influencer world, and with like the rise of that, yeah, I personally think two voices are better than are better than one. I can never do that on 1+1. Like, I constantly need like another.
I've done some solo shows when I have something else to watch and react to, or when I have something to read to the audience and talk about. I've done it with poetry, and I've done it with some documentaries. I admit I'm probably going to start doing some sports reaction videos just to have some content on days I don't have shows. And for a nice change of pace, if people are a little tired of all the heavy topics, sometimes it's good just to have something fun to watch. Plus, there are all sorts of interesting ways where politics cuts into sports and vice versa.
I was just about to say, can you really do a sports show which isn't heavy?
You can actually. You can do sports shows that are extremely rigorous in tone, but fun in rigorous in technique or approach. You put the work in, you don't laze off on it. But at the same time, you can make it a really fun show. Your show about Wilt Chamberlain doesn't have to be about why Wilt and Kareem hated each other, even if that does make for good political aspects. Since we're talking about ableism today, you go first. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'm sure you're very correct in that. I just find that there's so much politics in sports that you can almost make whatever political drama if you're in the entertainment industry, and of course there's kind of like the whole like personality clashes that go on between the different teammates, and then the kind of like personal drama that goes on behind the.
Well, you can always use sports as an analog for politics, because if you're doing something on the Boston Celtics or the New York Yankees, you can talk about how their corporate approach to building the best team, no matter what, was able to guarantee success, but it wasn't necessarily. It wasn't
very much so.
necessarily make it easy to root for them. It's like, who wants to root for General Motors, as they used to say about the New York Yankees back in the day. And when you're talking about ableism in sports, of course, whether it's mental health or physical health, ex-athletes have all sorts of problems after they stop playing because of the way that your body gets out of condition if you were an athlete and you stop exercising in many cases.
Well, also, especially when we talk about a lot of like physical contact sport or what we call blood sports, it can be everything from wrestling to boxing to mixed martial arts to martial arts itself to
Gridiron football,
to rugby. Oh my gosh, is there a huge collision course when it comes to
there was
that?
I don't know how well it was covered outside of the US, but some years ago, and even to a certain degree still ongoing, there's a major scandal about just how many concussions NFL players get over the course of a gridiron football career and whether that's really good for them or not.
Exactly, and yeah, it got a fair amount of coverage. I mean, before Keith Olbermann went super batshit with his Russophobia and whatnots, he he was on the beat covering this, and then there was a really good film starring Will Smith in one of his more better dramatic roles about the topic, and then I did a little bit of digging into it. There's some pretty good PBS Frontline about it, and then of course now and then ice hockey, because I cover Canadian topics. There's a huge problem going on there. Rugby, I'm sure it's a huge problem, but it's just not being covered in the sports journalism.
You got to figure
World of England.
You got to figure that rugby has got at least as serious a problem as the NHL and NFL, and possibly more because they don't wear helmets.
Well, and then there's also, and I was shocked when I saw a little bit of this documentary, but it was so disturbing I had to even stop watching it. But there was an ex Welsh rugby player who's gay, and he fights for the equality, queer liberation in that world and the other uber macho world of sports. And apparently he said in rugby and in similar sports there's a huge problem with anorexia, bulimia, and people who abuse steroids, which
well, I mean, any sort of competitive sport is going to have people talking about steroids regardless of how much people actually use them, because there have been so many periods of absolute paranoia about performance enhancements in sports.
Yeah, exactly.
Since the Major League Baseball scandal some years ago here in the US.
Yeah.
And then there was a smaller scandal a little bit after the Major League Baseball scandal that people don't remember as well, called Balco, where a guy was running a private medical lab in San Francisco where he was basically specifically designing steroids to get past drug tests.
Yes, I believe I watched a Netflix documentary about like that, and
some of the people who were named in that were boxers. It came out in connection to the Major League Baseball stuff, but some of the people named were boxers of serious national or international standing, and after that, it became one of the major roadblocks to a Floyd Mayweather-Manny Pacquiao fight, because Floyd Mayweather kept insisting Manny Pacquiao take a drug test to prove that he wasn't juicing to have moved up in weight so fast.
Wow. Well, then we also see the weaponization. Actually, in fact, that's almost a perfect segue into the topics we're going to talk about. So I'll just mention that we also see a kind of weaponization of that, and what I call and the most difficult form of propaganda to debunk and overcome is what I call the half truths, and that's exactly what happened with Russian athleticism, because I'm pretty sure there must have been some Russian athletes that were accused of it, but it became weaponized to such a ridiculous point to just completely boycott and punish Russia, having nothing to do at all with the athleticism.
Well, there was Cold War
going on.
Outside. The biggest thing about Russian steroid accusations during the 80s was the Cold War, of course. You can't leave that out. And they
even talk about that. They even talk about in those stupid Rocky movies.
The real advantage that Soviet athletes had is that Soviet athletes didn't have to worry about anything but being athletes while they were competing. They might have some day job that was supposed to occupy their time when they weren't competing or training, but that day job was largely a formal thing so that there was a direct means in which to provide for their needs and provide them with an income and the means of subsistence. Their job was competing in international sports events on behalf of the Soviet Union to try to spread that communist message of look what people can do with state support. Now that said, the real advantage they had, far beyond doping, is that the Soviet amateurs were frequently fully developed adults competing against countries who were sending high school students and college students to compete against them. And in those situations, the athletes who have been doing this for years but are still in their physical prime are going to do better than athletes who haven't learned everything yet and whose bodies are still developing.
Wow, interesting. That is interesting.
But I mean, for example,
yeah,
when Bill Russell of the aforementioned Boston Celtics went to the Olympics in the 1950s, he was a college student at the University of San Francisco. He was a big guy. His body had developed pretty well. He was a track guy as well as a basketball guy, and he actually qualified for the Olympics in both high school, in both high jump and basketball. But he couldn't do both. The track team wouldn't take him if he was going to play basketball too, because they were worried about him getting hurt and not being able to compete.
Interesting.
And so he chose basketball over track. But he could have gone to the Olympics as a track and field guy instead of a basketball guy if he had wanted. But he was a college graduate, whereas in the 1950s, the Soviet guy he was going up against was, maybe 3 to 5 years older, and who spent a lot more time in training and didn't have to attend college classes during the competition season.
Interesting.
But all that said is that's. The West chose to compete that way. Traditionally, athletes at the Olympics had been adults, late 20s, sometimes early 30s. The young guys doing everything was very much a post World War II sort of thing.
Fascinating. That is quite fascinating. And yes, and with that pressure to succeed, pressure to always wins, comes the ones who occasionally dope and so forth.
Well, now let's go from a segue to our intended topic here, because we're talking about drugs, and drugs are of course ubiquitous in entertainment as well, acting, music. The artistic sort of entertainment, the sports world on a more recreational side, and not just the There was a stereotype of the NBA in the 1970s of a bunch of black guys smoking weed and snorting coke in the locker room before games. And while it was a little bit exaggerated, at the same time, there were players who had given rise to a reason for that stereotype. And so you have to carefully weed fact from fiction. But you see, in cases like Britney Spears or Lindsay Lohan, you see celebrities have their addiction problems paraded in front of the media as an excuse for their families to make the fruit of these celebrities' labors family wealth instead of, workers' work product.
Yes, no, and in fact, and as we do a deep dive into that, now apparently, hold up, let me get. Okay, oops, I just lost it. Okay, so apparently yesterday, I don't know if there was if this was specifically a Canadian day or an international day, but there was some kind of, I think it was a Canadian day. It was a national day about commemorating violence against women and stuff like that. And when we talk about,
there's an international day for that too. So it may have been international. But every country, most countries have their own national version too, and you probably need to look up dates.
Yes, and the reason why I bring that up, and this is related to one of the main topics we are going to be talking about, which is the weaponization of mental health, the half truths of people who apparently have addictions and whatnot, and a lot of the kind of overlapping between ableism and even the stigma of mental health that creates that.
I'm going to ask you a question right off the bat, because this sets up a really good starting point, I think.
Sure.
What is addiction in a social sense, particularly, but also, of course, in a medical sense? But what is addiction? But in a social sense, what is addiction?
I guess the regular kind of, I guess the most easiest definition I can give just at the top of my head is somebody who can't control their urge to engage in.
I mean, but that just makes it sound like an impulse control
in gluttonous behavior, like somebody who drinks alcohol and just cannot stop themselves from drinking.
We were talking about steroids. Does anybody ever call Barry Bonds a drug addict?
No, but although you can develop a very nasty.
You can develop steroids are as allegedly addictive as any other drug. I say allegedly for a reason, because there are serious questions, like I said, about what addiction really is. But in a social sense, addiction is drug use that we don't like by people we don't like. No one calls Elon Musk a drug addict except liberals trying to score political points. Elon Musk brags about his ketamine use while supporting policies to lock up homeless people because they're junkies. So let's think about that contradiction for a moment. What is addiction? Why is the homeless guy that some landlord says is smoking crack an addict, and Elon Musk isn't an addict? We don't even know the homeless guy is really using drugs, and we're already calling him an addict.
You've just opened up a whole can of worms, and okay, all right, let's get into it because this is fantastic. This is fantastic. Now, but before we get deeper and deeper into that, so folks, think of what Chris just said. But before we get deeper and deeper into that, I just want to say the following. Now, I am a huge advocate of mental health care and mental health care being part of any existing or more radical single payer system globally, without exception. However, how do we advance such a system in a way that we don't have patients being abused? Example given: Britney Spears and her illness or whatever shortcomings she had being weaponized against her, and patients like her, where we get the where we get the huge human rights abuse, which was her conservatorship.
Does anyone even really know if Britney Spears even is or was, quote, ill, unquote? I mean, because as near as I can tell, all the claims of her so-called mental illness were based on her living a show business lifestyle and enjoying herself and not sharing her money with her family.
Interesting that you brought that up. So 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, just out of curiosity, I found myself thinking about, Britney Spears, her career, her overcoming the conservatorship, and let's just say I was, pardon my language, fucking mortified when I found out about the conditions of her conservatorship. And I had just and then it just so happened I actually bought myself a copy of her memoir, and I thought to myself, let me read it. And if you read her side of the story, it's shocking. It is really shocking. It's heartbreaking what she went through. It's stomach churning, and it's also blood boiling what she went through. And pretty much, if you listen to her side of the story, she was never ever an addict. If you listen to her side of the story, yes, she did struggle with mental health issues, but that was more related to her dealing with postpartum depression, which her entourage and her family did not take seriously. And here's the thing: she did have a breakdown, quote unquote, but she was never ever an alcoholic or an addict. She makes that very plainly. She makes that very plainly clear. And that being said, if you look back on when she was having a lot of flack, when Lindsay Lohan was having a lot of flack, when Paris Hilton was a lot of flack, I have to say the following: I do not think they were addicts. I think they were people that excessively drank, as we all do when we have a night out. Yep. And in a place like America, where you don't have adequate public transportation system, many people do stupidly get behind the wheel, and then you have DUIs.
Now,
but I have to say this. But I have to say this: I do not think Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, and even Paris Hilton, I do not think they were alcoholics or anything like that.
I think Paris Hilton should be criticized heavily for turning being an heiress to obscene landlord wealth into celebrity and a fake career in the entertainment industry. But I think that it is important to remember that lots of people use drugs, and that most people of Paris Hilton's class do not have their drug use scrutinized the way Paris Hilton had her drug use scrutinized. But I would rather go back to Britney Spears, because I don't have a lot of sympathy for Paris Hilton in general, because again, she's a heiress to a landlord fortune who has used her money to deprive people with actual talent of the ability to work in entertainment because she was part of the creation of reality TV to make people richer without doing much for working entertainers. But I'd rather go back to Britney Spears, because there were so many issues that all get caught up in Britney Spears. There's child abuse. There's child labor. And then there's the conservatorship, but you have to see the conservatorship.
And also grotesque, and also she was the subject of grotesque levels of misogyny, which
sure.
I'm going to bring up.
But I want to focus on the mental health and the addiction still, because it's really important to understand the context of her conservatorship in the context of her career. She starts as a child star on a Disney Channel show.
Yep, Mickey Mouse Club. Yeah.
In a time, there's never not been a time, but in a time when the agents for child stars connected to major Hollywood studios for television and movies were disgusting, abusive, manipulative perverts who frequently completely destroyed the lives of the talent they were responsible for managing. Listen to Corey Haim is dead. Corey Feldman is glad to tell everybody who will listen why Corey Haim is dead and why he hasn't had a career. And I think it's worth listening to voices like that. Todd Bridges has some stories about his parents and his agent that'll really terrify you. He played the older brother on Different Strokes in the 70s and 80s.
Yes, yeah.
Wow. And his now deceased child co-stars on that show went through the same things he did or worse. It's
Judy Garland.
Judy Garland, yes. Judy Garland is sort of the poster child in many ways for drug addiction, because she was labeled an addict, and her drinking and drug use were labeled the reason she didn't have a career, when the people who introduced her to drugs and booze were her own directors and producers who used drugs to get her able to work and calm her down after working, to manage the fact that she was just a kid.
And by the way, the systematic abuse of somebody like Judy Garland, who again, and then this is where we have the issue with half-truths. They weaponized her addiction, her mental illness against her, even though they were literally the cause of it.
They had taught her to manage
to the point where they literally drove her to die by misadventure or kill herself.
Well,
if you do just elementary reading about Judy Garland's life, I had to stop reading and listening to it because it was just so goddamn depressing, and the injustice so sickening that
she was personally blamed for drug use that she was taught was the normal way to manage your ability to work by the people that she trusted to tell her what her life was supposed to be like. So she was using drugs as an adult in exactly the same way she had been taught by the movie studio to use drugs as a child. And she was blamed for it, which brings us back to Britney Spears, who, again, started out as a child star on the Mickey Mouse Club, became a recording artist through a tremendously exploitative contract with Disney that gave Disney most of the fruits of her labor until she was able to sever that contract. And then when she was able to sever that contract, now her parents, who were getting all the Disney money under the old system, can't control her career anymore the way they could when it was all Disney contracts with them. And ultimately, her family has that conservatorship hung on her for the specific purpose of taking control of her money to maintain the family's wealth. You listen to the way her younger sister takes pot shots at her to make the family happy, and you can see how the younger sister's career has benefited by being driven from wealth that the parents took from Britney. And then the parents took that same wealth from Jamie Lynn while managing to keep Jamie Lynn in a world where she thanks them for everything they've done to her and believes it was done for her and attacks her sister. And the misogyny definitely comes into it, because I don't believe it would have been as easy if we were dealing with young white men. But, and this is a very important but, I remind everyone that there was a period during the 90s and the early 2000s where there was a new boy band every couple of years. It started with the Backstreet Boys, and then when their agent decided that they were too old, he literally replaced the Backstreet Boys with NSYNC. And when he decided NSYNC was too old, he literally replaced them with another boy band who were not nearly even as good as NSYNC, who were themselves not nearly as good as the Backstreet Boys. And then he replaced the third boy band with an even worse boy band called O-Town, who won a contest show to put a boy band together. 98 Degrees, that was the third one. To replace 98 Degrees. Now, meanwhile, within all this, while this O-Town reality show was going on, 98 Degrees and NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys were all suing their former manager because he stole their money and sexually abused them.
Yes! That's so true. That's so true.
Even though misogyny definitely comes into it, because it's much easier for the parents of a girl, it's important to point out that nobody is safe. That the people who run this music industry are in many ways predatory. They see their job as an opportunity for all sorts of licit or illicit recreational engagements, where consent is really less important than the business transaction at hand. And when I say the business transaction, I'm not even talking about sex work. I'm talking about how people are trafficked within the system in order to exchange favors between the managers and moguls that make the system go.
Yeah. Well, wow. I just have to keep applauding you, because that's a perfect summary of that period and still how the music industry operates. And I'll add more to that. So I read Britney Spears' memoir, which I actually recommend everybody read it, because, like I said, it was heartbreaking to read. It was blood boiling to read, and oh my gosh, and just so much injustice, comes out when you listen to her side of the story.
Yes.
So she says the following, and by the way, it's a very easy read. All of the chapters are very short. You almost can finish it within like 2 hours maximum. That's how great of a book and how engaging of a book it is. But anyway,
Britney Spears has never been intellectually pretentious or tried to use anything other than plain language. We can all agree on that.
Yeah, and so in the book, so if you listen, so in the book, so she says the following: how she got into the conservatorship, but there's some important background information that is really much worth relaying. So she grew up, I would say fairly poor. She came from a fairly poor economic background, and she mentions that her father was very much an absentee, alcoholic father who did engage in domestic violence against her mom. And throughout much of her life, even as she was getting into, the entertainment world, he was very much an absentee father, and it was mostly her mom who was kind of, the self-appointed manager and whatnot. Mm-hmm. This is all very important. So
yes.
So then, So she has her time on the Mickey Mouse Club, which was a very short period. There she meets and befriends other people who later went on to have successful careers. Justin Timberlake, who becomes part of NSYNC, Christina Aguilera, and Ryan Gosling.
Now notice that, you know, Christina Aguilera has had her own very public challenges in which people have said all sorts of things about her, and people have implied that she is or is not qualified to run her own life. I don't believe she's ever been put into conservatorship, but there were definitely people who were putting her through the same public scrutiny they put through Britney because her perceived lifestyle, and talked about her the same way. And we were just talking about what happened to the boy bands, and Justin Timberlake comes up again as part of the Mickey Mouse Club. And it's interesting that Disney is this sort of nexus for these abused kids.
Very much so. Very much so. Also notoriously anti-union and whatnot, but that's a whole other topic for another day. So, okay, so Britney has her very successful career already. She already has a very successful career when she gets into the music industry. She and Justin Timberlake, she was the opening act for NSYNC, and then she and Justin Timberlake later get closer and closer and have and become boyfriend and girlfriend and whatnot.
Yeah.
Now this is where this is where it gets interesting. So, as her career is progressively getting more successful, Justin Timberlake is starting to break out on his own.
Yes.
The relationship and the relationship ends. Now, here's where it gets really, really interesting. The official story, if you believe junk journalism and the gossip trash media, is the following: Britney cheats on Justin, breaks his heart, and we have nothing but endless empathy for Justin Timberlake as he does a creepy song and music video called Cry Me a River. Now, the misogyny is this. In the music video of Cry Me a River, Justin Timberlake breaks into his ex-girlfriend's house, does all sorts of pervy shit, then films himself with another girl, and basically leaves that for her to discover, and we're supposed to have empathy for that misogynist piece of shit.
Well, have you ever heard?
Now, this is where it gets more important. Listening to Britney Spears' side of the story, she says the following in her memoir: Justin was the serial cheater. I cheated on him once, sort of in response. I apologized for it. And then she claims that she fell pregnant with Justin Timberlake. He thought they were too young and pressured her to have an abortion. She does, but she has complications from that, and he comforts her. But then later, a couple of months later, just breaks up with her, and she falls into a deep depression because of it. She never ever, by the way, really adequately defends herself when Justin Timberlake goes on this media tour and Diane Sawyer engages in slut shaming, sex shaming, whatever the fuck you want to call it.
Well,
but for years,
I could be wrong about this. At the time, and I don't know how much of it's her and how much of it was her agent. I tend to blame her agent for the fact that it ended up happening in ways that were not necessarily good for her.
Yeah.
But the whole breakup with Justin Timberlake and the slutty bad girl image was being very deliberately used in order to break the Disney contract. And so if she had defended herself too much at the time, it would have hurt what her agent managers were trying to do for her in a business sense. And who knows whether she even had much of a say in it or not.
That's interesting. She certainly doesn't allude to anything like that.
Well,
but she does say the following: that
later on, someone else who has faced similar accusations ever since Miley Cyrus rather deliberately leaned into a bad girl image specifically to get out of her Disney contract. It was a strategy that she adopted on purpose on the advice of Dolly Parton.
Wow, that's
if you make yourself basically, and I'm sort of speaking like Dolly here, if you make yourself a cheap and trashy hoe, you will be able to get out of your Disney contract because Disney does not want to do business with cheap and trashy hoes. Now I'm using Dolly's language here, and I do not think of women in this way at all, but this was the strategy used to break the Hannah Montana contract that was so predatory and basically outright robbed Miley Cyrus to pay her family and Disney.
Well, but it's interesting you mentioned that because when reading Britney's memoirs, so she says the following. So she says without a question of a doubt, Justin Timberlake basically ruins her image, and she says it was so bad. She says she would go to basketball games even when she would try to disguise herself. The moment people realized that she was there, she would get booed because of the narrative Justin Timberlake spun. Because we were all groomed and marketed to think that when you break up with your girlfriend, whether she cheated on you or not, you have the right to stalk her, break into her house, and form some weird kind of revenge porn and whatnot.
Even more, we were given this idea that we were sold this image of Britney Spears that specifically in relation to someone who every girl in America had been told they were in love with by media, and who every girl in America thought they supposedly wanted to be with. And now you have this whole one step away misogyny thing where all the women get together and bully the girl for the man.
I remember,
and people call it women being catty, but it's really misogyny with one step removed.
Yeah. And so she says Cry Me a River basically ruins her. And again, she never really defends herself against Justin Timberlake, but that was the beginning. That was part one of her image being destroyed, and all of us and all of us riding the fuck Britney Spears bandwagon. So now so that happens. Happens. And then the following happens. She says throughout all this time, even as her career was still somewhat successful, she takes very good care of her family. She buys them a house. She takes care of them, and throughout the and she takes care.
She doesn't change.
And then later the following happens. She eventually falls in love with a pile of human waste manure in the form of of
Kevin Federline.
Of Kevin Federline. I won't get into too much the details of that, but that's also quite fascinating in of itself. And long story short, he was a pile of shit. Now she begins to suffer from postpartum blues when she has when she has multiple children, but basically is still told that she needs to work her ass off and so forth. And then at some point, the following happens. She befriends certain people. And certain people are saying to her that she needs to let loose and it's okay. It's all right for you to blow off a little bit of steam and so forth. But she makes it again perfectly clear. She was never, and I repeat, she was never an alcoholic.
Well, this brings me again, alcoholism is something where on the one hand we say, well, alcoholism is a health problem and not a moral failing. And then on the other hand, We label people alcoholics based on how we perceive them rather than our knowledge of their struggles.
Exactly.
We don't know whether the guy getting drunk down the bar from us is an alcoholic or not. And we don't know whether the people watching us at the bar, because let's remember, we're at the bar too, or we wouldn't see that other guy getting drunk. Does somebody else at the bar perceive us as an alcoholic?
Yeah,
I mean,
no, I completely agree.
And again, we have a celebrity culture in which it is normal for people to consume so much alcohol that they have to be put on an IV to prevent alcohol poisoning or to cure alcohol poisoning in some cases. And at the same time, we don't go around labeling everyone who participates in celebrity culture an alcoholic. It's very selective who gets labeled an alcoholic or a drug addict. And there's always some other reason involved that's somehow connected to someone else wanting to control someone.
Yeah, and in her memoirs, and in Britney's memoirs, so her marriage to Kevin Federline, ends in fiasco. That happens, but she's always from her point of view, she's always taking care of her kids. She's always subsidizing the life of her family, and she never ever understands why they have so much hostility towards her, even when she's taking care of them and so forth. And then at some point, after the dissolution of her marriage with Federline, she gets into a relationship, a very normal consensual relationship with her bodyguard. Her mom particularly is giving her shit about going out and whatnot, even though she's continuously taking care of her children as best as she can, being a fucking celebrity and whatnot. And then at one point, she comes back. She's on a trip in Mexico with her boyfriend. She comes back saying that there's an emergency, and this is sometime after her very messy divorce, where she has a breakdown and she shaves her head and so forth because she thinks that they're going to take her kids away from her and whatnot, and she has to do all this stupid stuff to show that she's a good parent, that her marbles are intact and so forth, even though, again, she's never been an addict or anything like that. She comes back from this from this trip in Mexico, saying that there's an emergency at the home, and then she comes back, and then before you know it, bam, you're in this conservatorship, and her absentee father, who she almost has no regular contact, all of a sudden, he is back with her mom, and she becomes literally a slave to this conservatorship, which progressively gets worse, and worse.
Yeah. Well,
and that's the huge scandal. And the huge scandal is the following: they controlled every element of her life. They controlled if she could drink coffee. They controlled if they controlled whether she could drink booze or not drink booze. Mm-hmm. They controlled they controlled her sex life. Anything. It's just unbelievable that stuff like this.
But this is what the wealthy do to maintain control of family money, to make it family money and not one person's money. Because remember, we have this twisted, and I say twisted because society should be providing for everyone's needs. But we have this twisted idea in our head that it is our responsibility and moral duty to give our kids a better life than we had, in which they won't have to do the things we had to do.
Yeah.
And among the ridiculously wealthy, this breeds a generation of absolutely useless fail spawn who have done nothing in their lives but live off family money, and who are, in a very real sense, exploiting a small number of family members who do all the work for a family that always retains control of the money. You can see this conflict when Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, talks about the relationship between her father, who considered himself an alcoholic and who died younger than he should have because of alcohol-related health problems.
Fred Trump, yeah, who apparently her grandfather never really approved of him getting into becoming a pilot and so
That
forth.
was working. That was working. His father didn't want any member of his family to work except in the family business, because if you're working in the family business, that's respectable. If you're working for someone else, you're a patsy, a buffoon. You're just another working douche. You've heard how Donald Trump talks about people who do the fighting in the military or do the working in actual work settings. He has total contempt for the chump, stupid people who actually do things and risk things and might get hurt so that he can make more money.
But how's this related to Britney Spears?
Because it's the same family wealth dynamic where the whole idea is, now remember, in Britney Spears' case, they weren't wealthy before Britney. It was Britney's career that made the family wealthy and generated the family wealth. But that does not change the fact that from the point of view of the family who now has this wealth, that we have to protect the family and provide for all our children. Keep in mind, this is how they justify it to themselves. Provide for all our children and not let this one brat take it all away from us just because she's the one who earned it.
Wow. Yeah.
And you see you see, if you watch any sort of media about wealthy families, you see this dynamic where people submit to abuse and engage in abuse themselves in this exaggerated game that's designed to both keep wealth in the family while also maintaining access to as much of the family's wealth personally as possible. The best example ever is a Michael J. Fox movie called Greedy, which stars Kirk Douglas as an allegedly dying billionaire whose family are jockeying for their share of the inheritance, because we're talking about family wealth, remember? And spoiler alert, this is where you turn things off for 30 seconds to a minute if you don't want the movie ruined. But he's not even dying and he's pretending to be in a wheelchair. He just enjoys fucking with his family and watching them compete for his favor.
Wow.
So there's this absolutely abusive dynamic going on his part too, where he's using his wealth to wave it in front of his family members and watch them fight like two cockroaches in a jar.
Yeah.
And spoilers over now. So, but this attitude among these wealthy families, whether they're new rich or old rich, it all breaks down to this idea that wealth belongs to the family. Wealth must be controlled by the family. The family must ensure everyone a certain lifestyle, but at the same time, someone has to be in control of the family and be able to punish bad family members. And a bad family member is anyone who in any way brings in wealth that belongs to them and not to the family.
But what's so scandalous about the Britney Spears conservatorship is is the following. This went through my head even as I was doing research before reading the book and then reading the book. The three most scandalous things are the following. Number one, that Britney Spears took good care of her family, and they would do this to her. Number two, her pile of shit father, who was a complete absentee his entire life, is now all of a sudden the fucking knight in shining armor. And number three, that he does this is scandalous enough, but that her own mother and sister consent to it.
That
for me was the most heartbreaking.
So scandalous.
So if I was to ever meet Britney Spears in real life, I would just give her a humongous hug, because that's just how fucking heartbreaking it is.
The most scandalous thing of all, really, is that this is normal. What did we say again about the intersection of Disney kids and horrible tragedy? What happened to the Glee kids? Look at their lives going forward. There have been a few people who seem normal and well adjusted and reasonably successful, but then you also have all these folks who are not with us anymore for a variety of reasons, and a couple of serious sex criminals.
Well, and this is a topic that we should do for another day night. But I just wanted to personally add is I saw that really disturbing documentary about the Nickelodeon kids, particularly those that were in All That. All That was like this really cool sort of teenage version of what Saturday Night Live was. I remember watching it when I was a kid, and I remember when my family had to move out of the U.S. I was so depressed because I really liked watching All That. And in this documentary, in this docuseries, it was just so disturbing that you find out that most of those kids were the victim of pedophiles, of pedophilia. Yeah.
Listen to the little blonde girl from iCarly and who published her autobiography about what was done to her as a teenager on that show.
It's so disturbing that I almost cannot watch almost anything of Nickelodeon because
so this is what I'm talking about. I mean, whether we're talking about 80s child stars, Nickelodeon, Disney, you've got this,
or even older than that, or even older than that, Judy Garland,
old Hollywood, yes, Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, Dean Stockwell, Jackie Cooper. All these people who were labeled as problems for various reasons as adults after being taught a certain way of living by all the adults in their lives, that's now suddenly their fault when they're grown up.
But that's but that leads to a very important question. Because again, it's so stomach churning and very chilling when you're reading Britney Spears' memoirs. She was forced to take lithium even though she does not have a mental illness. She's forced to go to 12-step programs, NA and AA, even though she again stresses she's not an addict. She learns a lot from those meetings, but she's not an addict. And if she in any way defies her parents, they make the conservatorship even worse. Multiple times she's forced to be in mental institutions. That's just so disgusting, and it's just so scandalous. And a lot of the doctors that are treating her, and a lot of the nurses are treating her, all in one. Some of them, the ones who have a conscience, are all saying to her that I cannot believe you're going through this, but look, don't be depressed, because do you know about this Free Britney movement that's going on?
Joseph Kennedy Sr. Joseph Kennedy Sr. had JFK's favorite sister lobotomized because of her alleged intellectual disabilities and her alleged mental health. And the only thing we know is that her father said that there was a problem and she was lobotomized.
Exactly.
We don't know what was going on with that, other than the fact that we know that Joe Kennedy Sr. was somebody who didn't have very much of a problem with Hitler and was perfectly happy spying on the British for the Nazis while he was FDR's ambassador to the court of St. James.
Well, and
another rich American, and once again we see how families control the members of their families and even destroy them if they think they don't belong.
But the misogyny is also the misogyny is so disgusting in that anytime a woman is either is promiscuous,
yes,
which I have a problem also with that term, but one that does have a very healthy, single, sexy lifestyle. It's funny how that's weaponized against them, and then they're told that they have to be fucking lobotomized and institutionalized. Whereas, and going back to Justin Timberlake and what a pile of misogyny, a pile of dung he is. There's been allegations about him being a serial cheater on his on his current wife. Well, but I don't see her making a Cry Me a River music video the way he did for Britney Spears.
Well, so the most practiced version of non-monogamy in the world is non-consensual serial monogamy. And everybody who practices non-consensual serial monogamy thinks of themselves as a good monogamous person and not as a horrible cheater who doesn't believe that there's any ethical responsibility to a partner until they find the one.
And then they divorce that partner, or what?
Well, but someone not being the one is an excuse to start cheating and find the one, and then move on to the next person who might be the one. But of course, this lifestyle might preclude there ever being a one, because you're never really stopping to breathe and look at what you have, and at the same time, you're not actually practicing the monogamy you claim to believe in. You're always cheating.
It's that old-fashioned. It's that old-fashioned.
What's more, this whole pattern of non-consensual serial monogamy is rooted in everything we experience as perfectly normal and healthy and in no way bad, even though this same media completely milks the drama of the actual damage that it does for entertainment value.
But there's also something deeply disturbing about, sexist double standards.
And, this is rape culture,
and the grotesque misogyny that comes with that. There is an avalanche. Look, it's in the Bible and various holy texts. There's an avalanche of this in fictional books, in movies, and TV. The following: that if a woman cheats or is accused of cheating, but if a woman cheats or is accused of cheating, death is coming knocking at her door. And we have an avalanche of real life crimes, but also movies and TV shows where if the woman has cheated, the boyfriend or husband stalks her and murders her.
Whoa!
When we talk about Justin Timberlake, again, I want to say the following: is that he is so upset at the idea that his girlfriend cheated on her that he feels the need to do a music video, Cry Me a River, where he breaks into his ex-girlfriend's house, sniffs her fucking underwear, tapes himself fucking another girl, and that's his revenge porn. And we are programmed, we are marketed, we are supposed to be on Justin Timberlake's side. Eminem, everybody's favorite shock jock, and I've had to really disavow Eminem and really rearrange my own morals. And that does a song, 2 songs, multiple triple songs even, where he is talking about murdering his wife for cheating on him. Even though if you listen to the lyrics of that disgusting violent pornography snuff film that is Kim, he's talking about, like, when I cheated on you, I was only 18. I thought we wiped that Slid King, and talks about murdering her, even though he's supposed to be a great father because he cares so much for his young daughter, now adult Hayden.
This is why women complain about rape culture, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a social belief that women are commodities to be consumed by men. Now, this is a social perception, not an objective reality. Women aren't being reduced to commodities in a material way, but they are being treated like commodities and being used like commodities and being abused like commodities because of a perceived property relationship between the woman and a husband or father or boyfriend. The woman is held to a male standard, while the man is also held to a male standard. And when you are holding everyone to a male standard, the man is going to benefit every time. And this breaks down to who makes the rules, who are the rules designed to benefit, and why do things operate this way? Well, I was talking about how wealthy families try to control their wealth. Well, who mostly runs wealthy families? Older men. This whole patriarchy thing that's been mentioned now and again, the whole idea of a patriarch who rules a family as a benevolent tyrant with everyone's best interests at heart. And everyone's best interests usually mean the stability and continuity and hopefully growth of family wealth.
Yeah. And luckily the Britney Spears story ends with a happy ending, and that she's able, due to the Free Britney movement, due to independent journalists, and due to secret whistleblowers who kept leaking this is how her human rights are being systematically abused.
Due to the power of celebrity culture, and due to the desire for capitalist reward in the future of people who saw a benefit in helping her in the short term for long-term gain. The reason I say this is because the escape available to Britney is not equally available to every woman in the grip of a controlling family exploiting her for the family's benefit. For example,
but that's a good segue. Okay, but Chris, so that's a good segue to the following question. But I do want to return to to vile misogyny, rape culture, and whatnot.
Yes.
But before I get that, that's a very good segue then to this big question, which I'm constantly thinking about. So, how do we advance the righteous, compassionate social justice cause that is mental health care for all in a single payer system, in new radical single payer systems, in existing quasi single payer systems? How do we advance that where we don't find patients being abused like a Britney Spears or a Judy Garland or a Michael Jackson type of character.
Well,
I bring that, and also because and this also goes back to the following, because now I understand that alcohol and drug addiction is a serious issue, but that too is weaponized in
I'm going to stop you there.
In a very reactionary, fascistic manner. Because for the following
When we
reasons.
say,
wait, for the following reasons. Because the majority of incarcerated people, or people who have had the bad luck of being in the crossfire of the racket that is the U.S. injustice systems, most of those people who are racked and stacked in what people call American gulags, even though I hate the anti-communist language of that, most of the people that are in prisons or and whatnots are there for non-violent drug or alcohol use. People who were just smoking pot harmlessly, and I'm sure others do. And then many of those people, by the way, and people who have been pulled over for a DUI, their punishment often is that it is mandated, if they want to avoid jail time, that it's mandated that they go into rehab, alcohol, and most of it Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's also very important, because people should get this book, The Sober Truth, because the AA system is quite a racket in and of itself. And so many people who are in rehabs should not be in rehabs because they're simply not addicts. And then the people who do have serious problems, a lot of them say that it's a crock of shit that doesn't really help them.
This raises the question I asked before about what is addiction, but in a different form. And that is, why do we accept the statement, I know addiction is a serious problem, as a given? Why do we believe that addiction is really such a serious problem, as opposed to, say, as opposed to the maternal mortality rate of women giving birth to children in America, specifically if they're Black or Indigenous, on an even more targeted level? Why are we told addiction is a more serious issue than maternal mortality or child mortality? Why are we told that addiction is a more serious issue than homelessness or child labor or actual human trafficking?
And even then,
like addiction and sex work.
But then even then, the person who is homeless, what is the stereotype is that is that they're to blame for their own misfortunes because they are a bunch of no good drug addicts,
or that mental illness is to blame for their misfortune, and if they weren't mentally ill, they wouldn't be homeless, because somehow they chose to be homeless because of their mental illness. This is a very popular lie in American culture, that people choose to be homeless because they're mentally ill.
But how does one choose to be mentally ill? That doesn't make
They
any
are
sense.
mentally ill, so they choose to be homeless. The mental illness causes them to make a choice to go be homeless instead of living in society.
That still doesn't make any sense.
It may or may not make any sense, but it is accepted as a truth by many people in America, that people simply would rather be homeless than have a home, and that's why they're homeless. And usually mental illness or addiction is to blame. Rich people do not understand the process of somebody having trouble paying their rent, getting evicted, still working, but living in their car. Rich people don't understand that is the homeless experience in America too. Rich people have a belief that the entire homeless experience is encapsulated by someone they see on the sidewalk who may or may not be homeless, who may or may not be a drug user, but who they make a decision about and classify them in a certain way, and then that person represents all homelessness to them.
Well, unfortunately, I think a few left-leaning middle-class folks would also recycle that same
Well, there's this whole media
idea.
again. I'm going to talk about media again. The media bombards us with images of what is normal. The media normalizes rape culture by telling us we should be sympathetic to Justin Timberlake in trashy tabloids, even while he's making money off of this misogynistic relationship porn of his breakup with Britney, justifying his nasty worst side of himself getting to play in a music video in a way that comes off as really creepy and makes you wonder about what he's done to some of his exes. But it's normalized, and it's normalized because the media tells us in a trashy tabloid we should feel bad for him because Britney cheated on him, and it's really screwed with his head, and that's why he's doing all this stuff. Somehow she's responsible for his actions, and questions of his mental health or addiction don't come up, despite the fact that he is also an abuse survivor in a toxic environment, exposed to all the same influences that make Britney a bad person.
Well, we're also
He's a good person. Why is he a good person? Because the media says so.
Well, it also, I mean, again, but just to give you an idea of how much of a terrible human being Justin Timberlake is, and I say this as a guy who does have a soft spot for his music. I mean, I want to also, go back to, I have to also rewind to Eminem and again say the following to people. This guy was marketed as hell, as this is the rapper you should like. This is the greatest rapper of all time, even though when you really listen to his lyrics, and I'm not even just saying this as a leftist who's very sensitive to feminist and queer liberation issues, but you listen to his songs, 97, Bonnie and Clyde, and Kim, and other songs where he's denigrating his ex-wife, that is not normal. That you talk about the mother of your child.
Now you're opening up.
And you talk about these violent murder fantasies and so forth.
But you know
what? I'll give him credit where credit is due. Her mental breakdown and so forth, and her struggle with her mental health. At least he's had the decency to pay for all of her treatment, and he's apologized. To his mentally ill mentally ill mom who had Munchausen by proxy, at least he's had the decency to apologize to them in songs and in public. Whereas Justin Timberlake, when he was called out for his misogyny, first he apologized, but apparently sometime last year he said before singing "Cry Me a River," I have absolutely nothing to fucking apologize for.
Now, I want to preface what I'm about to say with the fact that I love Larry Bird. Larry Bird is a great basketball player. Larry Bird seems like a good guy. Larry Bird doesn't appear to have a particularly serious problem with race in the way far too many white Americans do. On the other hand,
it's good white liberal.
That when you bring up Eminem, it brings up the point that white stars in black-dominated fields are frequently lifted up for their greatness in a way that their black peers are not, sometimes even by their black peers. There is a whole NBA media industry out there both the official NBA media industry on TV and on official NBA supported sites, and then there is a shadow NBA media that is sponsored by gambling sites. And then there is an independent NBA media that is just a bunch of NBA players hanging out and talking to each other. And a bunch of other people who really enjoy the NBA talking to NBA players and each other and making videos about players. And there's a lot of crossover that's not always clear. For instance, some of the absolute best conversations between former NBA players are on these podcasts that are sponsored by these horrible online gambling sites. And you've got, but what all of this media has in as a sort of this point of commonality is everybody loves to say nice things about the white guy who all the black people respected and thought was great. And you can see how respect for Larry Bird and paying homage to Larry Bird's greatness serves as paying homage to the white landlords who own the NBA.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the reason that the NBA as a social institution loved Larry Bird is the NBA was started by white guys who owned hockey arenas and wanted to have a sport to bring in money when the hockey season wasn't going on. And figured the best way to do that was to put wooden floors down over the ice part of the year and play basketball.
Interesting.
So the NBA is a sport that literally exists to enrich landlords who were annoyed by the fact that there was a period of the year when they couldn't charge rent. And any class examination of the institution of the NBA has to start with the fact that the original institution that became the NBA, the American Basketball Association, was founded by people who collected rent from hockey teams and ice skating shows, who wanted to be able to make money off their venues when nobody was skating or playing hockey.
Fascinating.
And that is the reason that the league that is now like the sports institution in America, the NFL might also be a close competitor, but the reason the NBA exists originally was so that landlords could charge more rent, more time for a longer period of the year.
And with that comes but with that also comes a very interesting thing, because you're talking about how everybody has to pay homage to Larry Bird. He's a nice white liberal. He doesn't mind having to. He's a nice white liberal amongst all of these kind of troublesome black people.
He's a respectable member of the petty bourgeois whose parents owned a farm despite the hard work ethic of his father, who had to maintain a side job. His whole family still has a sense of family property. All of their farms sort of extend out from their mother's farm, where Larry still holds court as the patriarch of the family. And I don't say this to denigrate Larry Bird. I say this to remind everyone of Larry Bird's original class origins. I would say that Larry Bird probably has more of a class orientation towards his fellow workers in the NBA than he does towards other landlords overall. But at the same time, his class background is the sort that made him the natural favorite of the white landlord class that owns the NBA. He's a white male property owner.
But how would you compare him to, because you're sort of making an allusion to him and Eminem and the far too much overpraise that Eminem
Well,
gets, even though Eminem is
Eminem's
literally every
parents were still Eminem's parents were still the immiserated white lower class, and not the immiserated white lower middle class, and not the urban working black person, or even the middle class black person like Kanye West. But this sort of, he came into black culture as a tourist from the other side of the tracks, and he stayed there.
Yeah.
Now, lots of things have been said about Eminem since and about whether or not he's really been respectful of the culture that has made him so wealthy or not. I don't know enough about hip hop specifically to want to wade into that topic, simply because that's not my personal kind of music. If you look at me, you can see that my people's music is classic rock. It sort of shows.
Yeah. No, but that said, that actually is a topic I'm hoping to explore one of these days with Jared Ball or Diallo. I will say,
I'm not the right person to talk about that topic with, except to say that Eminem, like Larry Bird, is someone who can be used, who makes a black product saleable to white people.
Yeah, exactly.
And because he makes a black product saleable to white people, he is great because he brings in money that would otherwise not be brought in. I'm going to say something else from one of these amazing NBA videos, because it's so honest, and it doesn't, and it's easy to start here and take the next step. And I think I'm actually going to have to do an analysis of a guy's argument about why Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the best basketball player who ever lived. But anyway, when they talk about Magic and Larry saved the NBA, and Magic and Larry made it possible for all these other basketball players to be multi-millionaires,
yeah,
it's important to understand that who Magic and Larry were and what they meant in the cultural zeitgeist that was going on at the time. Remember what I said about the stereotype of the NBA in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Now take the fact that this is from an argument that Kareem is the best player ever, so there's a slant to this, but it's still important to keep in mind, because lots of people thought this way, especially in the 1970s. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when he went professional under his original name, was greeted by an article by the great social writer Jimmy Breslin, who represented the social position of upper middle class white men in New York City very well.
The New York Daily News
wrote an article asking, can basketball survive Lou Alcindor? It's very important to remember that he also wrote an article when Wilt Chamberlain went professional. Can basketball survive Wilt Chamberlain? Now, Wilt Chamberlain saw himself as primarily an entertainer, which was probably very good for his mental health in some ways and very bad for it in others, and not as necessarily a hardcore competitor. Whereas Kareem Abdul-Jabbar very much saw himself as a hardcore competitor and a serious athlete, and someone who took the philosophy of sport itself very seriously, and the social culture in which sport took place he considered also important, and he always tried to be a spokesperson for social issues. Now, of course, if you're always talking about black issues, you're going to be defined as black before you're defined as a basketball player. So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is, in everybody's view, that black basketball player. And if you're a racist white person, it doesn't sound that polite.
Kind of like OJ. Kind of like
I hate
OJ.
to toot my own horn, but for other people who are in independent media and want to avoid making fools of themselves, do you see how easy it was for me just then not to use the N-word? But anyway, that aside, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was seen a certain way by the mostly white fans who watched the NBA. And basketball, ironically, in the 50s and 60s was seen as a very white sport.
Interesting.
When Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell slightly before Wilt, became extremely successful athletes in the NBA, they were competing mostly against big white guys who looked a lot like Larry Bird. The stereotype of an NBA player in the days before Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar looked like Larry Bird. There's so much about Larry Bird that goes to the roots of basketball as this upper Midwest and Northeastern sports experience that was unique to itself in this very white part of America, in this very white subculture. But it became it became a black dominated sport in the 70s because there were so many great black basketball players who were playing basketball in high school and college, just waiting to be discovered. And it became a huge talent pool. And these guys were so eager for a chance that they were working hard. And so you have this whole culture of coming to prefer black players from the white landlords who own the league, that by the 1970s, coaches prefer black players to white players, and you have a very black league that starts to have more of the looser and freer aspects of black street culture move into the league because it's become a black league. And these aspects of black street culture, the music, social attitudes towards drugs as perceived by white people, the white need to label the unapproved drug use as addiction. Now you have this perception of the league by the racist white fans who grew up watching white guys play this sport. Now they see everybody playing this sport as black. The best athlete in the world is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is so good and scores so easily that people who are used to a faster paced sort of game switch to the ABA with the red, white, and blue basketball and all the slam dunking and the three-point line, because Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is seen as, well, he's just going to shoot that skyhook 50 times in a night and his team is going to score 100 points and they're going to win. I'm going to go watch Dr. J.
Well, there is also a little bit of that disgusting kind of like
but it's ironic because the NBA in the 70s was losing commercially because of the black NBA being more entertaining, and chose to absorb the black ABA into itself in order to control this more entertaining brand of basketball. And they end up imposing whiteness on it to such a degree that they alienate their own fans because they can't adapt all of this talent that they thought was hurting them to their very white worldview.
I was just about to say, but it's getting us too much from.
Yes, I know. There's a whole show about this itself.
Yeah,
but it
but
comes into this
exactly. No,
patriarchal.
but I just wanted to add that there is that kind of projection of racist policies of the respectable black man who doesn't speak up for his people. You had that with O.J. Simpson until the murder. And you have that, and you have that in basketball. Michael Jordan is the wonderful black person who doesn't speak up for his people, and then Dennis Rodman and Allen Iverson are the bad black guys because they got the tattoos and they dye their hair and they embrace hip hop culture. Although Allen Iverson's rap music was disgusting and misogynistic, but then again, what rap music isn't? But that's a whole other topic for another day. But when we talk about Eminem, though, and getting back onto misogyny, ableism, and the stigma of mental illness, Eminem is the biggest offender of that. Look, it's terrible if anybody grows up in an abusive environment and so forth. But from Eminem's own admission, his mom suffered from a mental illness, Munchausen by proxy syndrome. So years later, when I stopped listening to Eminem, stopped listening to rap music, and started to have these conversations with myself about feminism and queer liberation, how I can be not just a better person but a better ally, I thought to myself, we were marketed so much to like Eminem and to feel sympathy, empathy for his self-pity, victimhood bullshit. And then I had to sit, and then I realized one thing, Chris. I said to myself, wait a minute. If his mom has a mental illness, Munchausen by proxy syndrome, we should be having empathy for her, not stigmatizing her and engaging in ableism.
This is where you start to raise the question. Okay, so where is it really? Is Munchausen's by proxy really a mental illness in the sense that we're talking about? Or is it a set of social symptoms of something else? And are we projecting a mental illness framework onto it in order to let certain people get away with certain things in certain situations?
Okay. Look, that's a very interesting point, but that goes back to my question of how do we advance single-payer mental health care for all without weaponizing people's mental illness, and then
you don't want to weaponize
conservatorship
and not wanting to weaponize mental illness is an important reason we need to be careful about how and what we define as mental illness.
But before we do that, again, I have to go back to the Eminem thing. Is that okay? If your mom did have this illness, that's not her fault, especially given the conditions that comes with poverty and so forth like that. So him constantly denigrating her, him talking about murdering his ex because he accuses her of cheating is vile misogyny.
Now, I'm going
of the worst kinds.
I'm going to say two things and sort of separate something a little. First, now there's a court case that ended up a pop culture documentary about a young woman who was confined to a wheelchair and forced to act as if she were disabled by her mother, who was then using her alleged disability to control her life. She shot her mother and went to prison for it. Now, from her point of view, she was acting in rational self-defense from someone who was forcing her to live a certain way because of a disability she didn't have, in order to, from her perception, gain attention for themselves and sympathy from others for the terrible condition of her child.
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't want to minimize whatever material conditions led to her mother making the decisions her mother made. Her mother made a series of decisions motivated by gain at her daughter's expense. And so I think it is completely unrealistic to expect Eminem to ever love his mother under the conditions of his childhood, or to ever empathize with his mother to the degree that we might be tempted to empathize with his mother by medicalizing the things that she did to her child.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think we can separate that from the fact that he believes his mental health gives him the right to abuse his wife in precisely the same way he perceives his mother correctly, perceives his mother to have abused him for correctly precisely the same excuse.
But all that being said, credit where credit is due. He has apologized for all of those songs where he's denigrating his mom, and has
I'm not going to give people credit for apologizing. Everybody should apologize, and that's sort of the bare minimum.
Yeah.
I don't want to stigmatize. I don't want to stigmatize him too much.
Chris. No, but the point I'm trying to make is that while you're saying we should not have too much empathy for whatever abuse his mom did, I'm just saying he said, "Look,
I'm not saying we should be empathetic. I'm not saying we should be empathetic. We shouldn't be empathetic towards him as a survivor, but I think you notice that he holds himself to a different standard than he holds his mother as part of this same patriarchy we're talking about."
But that's all. But that's kind of the point. Well, that's
I know. I know that's the point you're making too, but that's a very useful double standard, is that the things that his mother did to him were horrible, while the things that he did to his wife are something he can apologize for. Would he accept his mother's apology?
He's apologized for both. In song and apparently.
Well, but would he accept his mother's apology? That's my question.
Didn't at the time, only late in life.
So you see, this is
conundrum.
More that. I mean, if it's all, and we have these ideas that, the fact that the fact that Eminem's apology is something that he should get credit for in itself is a product of this very topic that we're discussing.
Yeah.
What has he done to change his behavior? What has he done to undo the harms that were done by his behavior before? Has he made any sort of material restitution if somebody wanted it? Has he gotten his ass out of people's lives if that's what they wanted? I mean, there are all these
it's interesting. Two things in response to your question. He has financially paid for the mental health treatment and addiction treatment of his ex-wife, who, quite frankly, if she's having struggles, it's his fault.
Well, and there's the thing, is how much of that is just medicalizing the results of his abuse? You were talking about rehab yourself earlier. Is rehab necessarily what someone in that situation needs?
Well, you know, a lot of, and also a lot of people, one of my problems in general with the whole disgusting private for-profit rehab industry is the following. Hypothetically, let's say somebody is suffering from whatever drug addiction, alcohol addiction, or multiple addictions. Okay, you can treat that symptom. By all means, do it. Does not change the fact that it doesn't change the fact that so many people who I prefer the term are problem drinkers or problem drug users have very deep mental health problems, and that should be treated.
But I mean, is it mental health problems? I mean, so are we when we talk about drug use or drug abuse? I'm going to use a metaphor because while metaphors are not material reality, metaphors can help to explain material reality. So I have a hammer. If I have a hammer and everything looks like a nail because I have a hammer, to use a popular expression, I might abuse the hammer. And by abusing the hammer, I might use the hammer in a way that it's not meant to be used to solve a problem it's not meant to solve. That would be hammer abuse. I am improperly using the hammer in a way that is harmful to the hammer or myself or others. Now, if my use of the hammer leads me to smash in the heads of other people,
then it's a problem.
Is the problem my abuse of the hammer, or is the problem my abuse of the hammer to smash in the heads of other human beings? And in that case, is my abuse of the hammer really the issue, or is the issue really my abuse of the human beings who I killed with the hammer?
All very good points. Because, I mean, what was I going to say?
Now, this goes into gun control and so many other issues. And if someone is too libertarian about it, it becomes an excuse for everything. But at the same time,
exactly.
At the same time, we have to examine some of the philosophical truth of our language about something like drug use, drug abuse. So, I mean, if I hate my job,
yeah,
and I get stoned when I get home, I am using weed to self-medicate from certain mental and physical health issues I am suffering because of my job.
Yeah, no.
But the problem is not that I am mentally ill or that I am abusing weed or that I am addicted to weed. The problem is that my job is abusing me. Now, if as a result of the things that my job is doing to abuse me, I make the choice to go to work and go absolutely postal in the worst possible way, then I am making a choice in reaction to my workplace conditions, and I am not shooting up the workplace because I am a deranged drug addict. Now, I should not be dehumanized as a deranged drug addict, but I also should not be absolved of my moral responsibility for choosing to take my exploitation out as much on my exploited coworkers as on my boss. by calling me a deranged drug addict. That's not the situation that led to this chain of events happening.
Well, but you hear so many stories of the of the person who quote unquote got drunk, blacked out drunk, and then goes on a fucking murderous rampage, murdering his girlfriend or wife and children and other family members.
Have you ever blackout drunk? You notice that nobody ever uses blackout drunk to actually absolve the drunk person of responsibility if he kills someone during a blackout. How many people who were supposedly blackout drunk were still executed by Kansas or Texas or whoever? Now, there are lots of people who get blackout drunk and don't kill people.
Yeah, exactly.
Think of how many people. We were talking about steroids earlier. We were talking about steroid scandals in professional sports. A colleague of mine from the boxing world, William Detloff, formerly of The Ring and Ring Theory magazine, once said, if steroid abuse really led to deranged violence, there would be a whole lot more murders by boxers who we know use steroids.
Well, they may not be mass murderers, but certainly the abuse they do.
But then there has been a lot of deranged violence, to use the same word, by boxers who haven't abused steroids because of the physical symptoms of being hit in the head a lot and the whole lasting symptoms of concussions.
Yep. Very
and
fair.
If you think it affects NFL players who play this sport in a helmet and pads, how much do you think it affects unhelmeted men punching each other in the face for a living?
Well, okay, that's good. So let's go a little bit down this rabbit hole, and I'm going to lay my cards and talk a little bit about my own, personal life in that respect. So I have a learning disability, which it's a neurodivergent one called auditory processing disorder. I myself do struggle with mental health issues. I particularly struggle with anxiety, and I have a mild form of bipolar disorder, or I prefer the term manic depressive disorder. Now, in my own lifetime, I have been what can only be described as problem drinking. Now, that being said,
what you are describing, this also could be self-medicating for your bipolar disorder.
Exactly. And when we talk about addiction and so forth, I just want to say the following. I remember when I was going to college, Vesalius College, which no longer exists, was a private, overpriced English speaking college in Brussels, and I remember the following when I was going to that college. It was the following was this: me and my classmates, we would drink in the morning before class. We would drink a lot in between classes, and we would get fucking wasted when classes were done. Go to multiple bars and get very drunk.
I am from the country.
And then when I would get home, after having late night dinners, would continue drinking.
I come from the country where the movie that inspired that particular version of college life was made. Remember.
Now I bring this up precisely for the following reasons.
There's also a perception, though, that college students are supposed to drink all the time. And where does that perception come from? From all these movies I was just talking about that shows college students drinking all the time.
And you got to drink because you don't want to miss the fun. You don't want to miss the fun and the social elements.
Drinking is the fun part of college. Yeah.
Well, I bring this up for the following reasons. I'm not going to get too much into why I was self medicating. That's a whole other story for another day if we want to do a whole biography on that. But I bring that up because I personally think that is the average alcohol user, or even the average or the average pot user. I personally think there's a little bit of addiction in everyone, and when we bring up the topic of Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, the reason why I challenge the accusations many people said about them is I think they were just normal people who live that celebrity lifestyle where you are afforded.
Well, addiction.
You can afford to have such a partying, excessive, hedonistic lifestyle.
Addiction.
So I do not think so. So I do not think they were addicts, and I think people weaponized what they deem was excessive alcohol use and so forth to incarcerate them and to put Britney Spears in that ghastly conservatorship.
So to get back to our question of what is addiction, addiction is a weapon used against some drug users. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you live in Belgium. I live in the US. Holland isn't too far from Belgium. You are probably familiar with the phenomenon of Catholicism and Protestantism. Now, one of the things that Catholics and Protestants agree on is people should work, damn it. Now, another thing that Catholics and Protestants agree on, despite frequently claiming not to, is there are good people and there are bad people. Good people are going to go to heaven because they deserve it. Well, and then there's a whole other thing about whether or not people really deserve it that gets into the deep theology. But the basic accepted practice of the religion is good people go to heaven because they deserve it. Bad people go to hell because they deserve it. Therefore, there are two kinds of people. Good people who deserve everything we can do for them to help them out because they're good people. And bad people who deserve to go to hell and therefore don't deserve any sort of help from us whatsoever. Yeah. So whenever we talk about whether people should be helped, we come to the question of whether they are good or bad people. And anytime we are looking not to help people, we weaponize language to make them bad people, as perceived by society.
Well, and also, so much of the misogyny mindset, misogynistic culture. Again, I know religion gets a bad rap. There's a lot of good in religion, but I do have to blame religion for this because a lot of it is in biblical texts. Misogyny, and also the stigma when it comes to mental illness, that suicide is a sin. The 7 deadly sins is all. One of them is sloth. Sloth, which really stigmatizes people who have mental illness. You have something like this, and you have somebody like Britney Spears, who comes from the U.S. Southern Bible Belt background. She is. Coincidence much? Hashtag coincidence much?
Her whole family is deeply rooted in the patriarchal culture of Americana, is the best way I would put it. Because you can't blame it just on the South. We love to blame it just on the South, but there is this whole culture of Americana based on idealized urban life, idealized suburban life, and idealized rural life, which is always white or white conforming and is always Christian or Christian conforming.
Yeah, no.
Americana has been spread all over the world in various other forms by various other people for their own reasons, and America, in the form of corporations like Disney and Warner Discovery, which is about to be bought by Netflix, is in the business of culturally selling Americana to the rest of the world as something aspirational.
Well, and you want
to empower the American empire.
Yeah, and that same ethos, that same reactionary biblical ethos is also the same kind of stuff which influences the mindset of child abuse.
Well, the reason parents
and institutional pastry. What is the because I'm pretty sure Brittany's mom and father, what's that that thing that comes from the Bible, the whole spoil the child, beat the rod,
spare the rod, spoil the child. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, man. Oh my gosh. And hey, I have seen in Congolese culture and so forth like that. I have seen people just like that's how you treat the child. You just
I have a question for you.
Fire and brimstone.
Well, no, I don't have a question for you. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother show. But basically, what I want to say as I get to where we should probably wind down and touch base about whether this discussion created any other shows we want to book. But
you see the conundrum. You see the
conundrum.
I do. You see the conundrum. Sorry to interrupt you, but this is where it's going to take a lot of very intense conversations among social justice movement, which is again, how do we advance mental health care and not find patients being abused the way that Britney Spears and Judy Garland and Michael Jackson and others, Lindsay Lohan and whatnots. And
one of the topics we have to talk about on a future show is political indoctrination and information warfare and how Americans or American adjacent Europeans are raised to view the world in a certain way. And how anything that would threaten that is called political indoctrination, while we never actually question the political indoctrination that's being pushed into everybody in the first place. And how can we not indoctrinate people, or rather, how can we indoctrinate people into the idea of a positive social relationship instead of the idea of all these toxic social relationships? Which brings us back to all sorts of questions about revolutionary education and how we need to prepare ourselves to answer these questions.
Apologies, folks. I'm having some internet connection problems. So, okay, I think it's okay right now. But yes, that is something that we are definitely going to explore in a future show. But yes, but in the future, and I want people to be very mindful, those who are involved.
Looks like Youri's had. Yeah, it seems like if we go too much past 2 hours, Youri has some internet issues lately. So this is my fault for not stopping before we reached this point, like last week. One sec. Can you hear me?
Hi, sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I've noticed that when I successfully ended the show right before the 2 hour mark last week, we didn't have this problem. And when we went a little over 2 hours, I noticed that it started happening again. I think it's partially based on how long your connection runs.
You can hear me now. Can the audience?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying.
Okay. So just wanted to quickly.
And now you seem to, now I can't hear you again, or couldn't for a moment.
Okay.
I can hear
Sorry.
you
I'm
for
having this.
now.
Okay. All right. So I just want to quickly say before my internet goes down that. Okay. So I just want to quickly say before my internet connection goes down. So these are questions that we need to ponder, and those who are involved in the mental health care for all movement really have to think deeply about these issues so that we do not have, patients being.
And it looks like Yuri's internet is going down again, which I need to be more mindful of time and how that's going to affect his connection going forward. I want to thank Youri for joining us. Hopefully he'll be able to come back to finish his final thoughts before we have to end things. If not, then I hope Youri has a great week. I want to say a lot of the language around addiction and sexual behavior and mental health is framed in this duology of good and bad people. And that good people deserve compassion and help and bad people don't. And while there are people who do things that cheap grace alone, as the religious would put it, can't fix, we have to be mindful of the social issues that cause this stuff as much as we need to be mindful of personal responsibility. And while personal responsibility is real, there's not some world where we can force everybody to be responsible under the threat of punishment. If that were really possible, it would have happened already. And Youri, welcome back if you want to try to finish your final thoughts.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, no. So just wanted to say the following before my internet goes down is that in the future, going forwards, I want people who are involved in the very righteous, just cause of mental health care for all. Mental health is health, and having that part of any new or existing single parent system. The following is that we really have to be careful when we advance this that we don't find patients being abused like a Britney Spears, a Judy Garland, a Michael Jackson, whatnot, and that people get the proper care that they have. But if people are forcibly incarcerated, we have to think about how to make sure whatever flaws some people have, whatever shortcomings people have, that it's not weaponized against them. That's just the point I just wanted to make.
And
going forward,
this starts to tie into the real meaning of permanent revolution, which is less about the unending war of socialists against the rest of the world that some people with a nationalist bent would like you to believe, and is much more about the idea of understanding that we need to look at all our institutions with a revolutionary eye to see how those institutions are used by the capitalist system to hurt people, and to hurt people for the worst of all reasons, for money.
Yeah.
And the goal of any social revolution is not to reform these systems so that people's exploitation is more easily accepted by everyone, themselves included, but to actually end exploitation and find ways to make society materially better for everyone. And we have to remember that ultimately the goal is making things materially better for everyone. and to understand that doing so requires a serious change in the way we organize our society and the systems that support it. It is not enough to overthrow the ruling class. You have to maintain a revolutionary approach towards everything that you do from a social level until you have actually built a new status quo for society that is just. You will not have the social peace and order you desire without an underlying framework of justice in which people get what they need to live before we start to ask questions about what people deserve. And what people deserve should be about the actual choices they really make, but also about the framework in which they feel that they don't have any other choices, and that we need to understand how to teach people how to perceive and think about our responsibility towards each other as much as about our individual comfort and happiness. Because we are too quick to throw each other under the bus for too many reasons. And happiness is just a temporary chemical dopamine hit that's never going to last forever. If you want to ask me my opinion about what addiction is, my opinion about addiction is that addiction is when you start to think that you can feel like this all the time, and that you can somehow prolong and maintain infinitely the dopamine hit that you get from being happy right now. Because I'm sorry, I mean, that life is not uninterrupted happiness. There's boredom, there's sadness. I mean, everybody deals with issues that we do have to get better at taking care of each other about. But this also involves a certain amount of understanding of our own material and mechanical realities, whereas our bodies and our minds are not physically equipped to be happy all the time any more than it would be healthy to be depressed all the time. We have to be able to deal with the natural flow of our emotions in some socially rational way that is just for everyone. And that's what we're trying to achieve in the end.
And interestingly enough, Michel Foucault, who wrote wonderfully about mental illness and the weaponization of that, he was, however, very wrong when he did not advocate for mental health care to be part of a single-parent system. But I think that's only because but it goes back to what you were just saying, that we do not need to reform existing bad mental health facilities, but we do need to revolutionize it and make it a proper place of compassion that it should be.
We need to change. We need to think about how we think about mental health entirely, because a lot of what we call mental health issues are normal, rational reactions to a shitty world. Yeah, I'm depressed and anxious. Look at what's happening. If you're not depressed and anxious right now, are you just out of touch? Are you just naturally happy and have to remind yourself sometimes about what other people are going through? I mean, it's worth thinking about. It's worth it's worth if anybody's going to psychologize you and think about the reasons for why you do things, it should be you and not some patriarchal authority out there. And that's all I'm saying. On that note, I want to thank everybody who's stuck with us today. I want to thank Youri for braving an internet connection that goes a little crazy after 2 hours of live streaming. And I want to thank everybody who's watched the show this week. I hope to be back next week, but don't know yet how long it's going to take me to book a show. And so we'll see. In the meantime, thank you, everybody, and we'll tweet at you. Take care.
Good night and good luck.
Good luck indeed.